Are we good on your end? Very good. City Clerk, we good on your end? Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you. Seems like we just did this the other day. So hopefully we'll get in and out of here fairly quickly like we did the other day. And I think we have Councilmember Schisler on the line. Is that right, Brian? Okay. Jill, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Welcome. So, all right, City Manager.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So today we're going to be talking about the changes since the June workshops for the capital budget and the special revenue funds. So the presentation's on the screen. This should be relatively short. In terms of our general fund, we had a series of projects that were proposed to be funded initially. As I mentioned to council just a few days ago, that was just because pretty much everything was just sort of put in the budget, but we've gone through and scrutinized, and we have made some changes. So from the general fund, we had a project that was to be funded for network switch equipment, and we spread that out. As I mentioned the other day, it was $80,000 originally. We put 60 in the general fund. We put 20 across the enterprise funds. That's spread out, 16,000 in water and sewer and 4,000 in sanitation. The library museum, good morning, Councilmember Fernandez. Actually, great timing. We were talking about your project. So the library museum, we've had conversations about this, and actually Councilmember Fernandez and I have as well. And what we've proposed to do is, because the $50,000 that was presented in the first draft was actually just for design, the actual project would probably cost $200,000 or $300,000 to enclose that portico area on the Bullard Parkway facade of the library. And then obviously there'd be costs, ongoing operational costs. So that was probably a little bit more than the council was probably envisioning, as well as the administration. So we have removed the $50,000 from the general fund for this project, but what we've done instead is added $15,000 to the CIT to purchase display cases. So we can have some display cases for some of the memorabilia artifacts from the city's history. We can have a case, for example, at the library. We could also have a case at the Family Rec Center, which is one of the items that the council member spoke with me about. So this gives us some flexibility to kind of move that around if we'd like, and still does testament, sort of honors the community's history. Another project was the Lightfoot floor replacement.
Carlos, is it,
Yes,
is it okay if we pause here for a
Yes,
second,
absolutely.
see if there's any comments on the library? Councilmember Fernandez?
So the goal ultimately is to get items that have been maybe locked away in back recesses of the library, and maybe people have in their houses, to get them displayed to show Temple Terrace history. And one of the thoughts over the course of years has been to close in that side of the library that really doesn't get any use at all. Nobody walks there. It's completely unused. And actually move some of the computers out of the center of the library into that space, because the computers are so heavily used. And it would be, this was the thought process a few years ago. It would be more organizationally, spatially organized to move all the computers out into that space, and then have the center space for display, various things going on. So, but the cost, that was all envisioned part of a larger project. And, obviously this is expensive. So I don't have a preference of we have to do this project a certain way. I just think it's important that we start finding ways where residents are and people are to start displaying interesting things about Temple Terrace history. So I don't have any issue with just doing some display cases. And I did think that maybe it would be possible to do some at the Family Rec Center also, since there are quite a few people there in and out of that rec center. And certainly it would give people who are sitting and waiting for whatever their child is doing, something to look at, and just, another way to inform people. So I don't have any issue with this change, is what I'm saying. My goal is just to start getting things out there and getting the information, so.
Okay, great. And I don't think that this necessarily means that we're abandoning the idea of someday in the future doing something
Right.
more robust,
But
but.
starting small.
But starting right now, right, okay, good. Anything on this?
I do.
Yes,
And maybe not for this next year's budget. I would like to explore getting a mobile display case. I've seen those at other events around where it's just saying a display case on a trailer, a nice trailer. That way it could go out the year, our anniversary year could go to the Arts Festival, it could go to Brew Fest, it could go all the different activities to promote our 100 year.
okay. Certainly explore that. Gil, anything on this?
Nope, I'm in agreement with what the city manager proposed.
Okay, great, thank you, Carlos.
The next item is the pool lap lane lines. It's kind of hard to say. We moved those to an out year. So as I mentioned on Tuesday, we looked at all the leisure services projects, the Parks and Recs projects primarily, and anything ranked over 20 we moved. And so these are the ones that were sort of lower on the priority list. The next one is the Jungle Gym Fitness Station for the Family Rec Center. We also moved that out to an out year. And then the code compliance vehicle we talked about on Tuesday, that we're not going to purchase that at this time. We're going to use the existing fleet. Any questions on the general fund changes? Okay.
No, any questions?
No.
Gil?
I'm good.
Okay.
So this slide is just summarizing the changes we made to the CIT capital project. So there was a crime scene van that was originally in there. It was never meant to be in there. It was an oversight. It was really always meant to be an out year project. So we just made it clear that we've moved that to the out years. Originally, there was a budgeted number of $185,000 for replacement of the Lightfoot Center windows with impact glass. But that's a project that we're applying for a grant for. So the 185 was the total project. And so we were hopeful we'll get this grant. And if we get the grant, then the match is the only thing we're budgeting for right here now, $18,500. So we wouldn't do this project without the grant. So that's where we are. We're hopeful to get those dollars. Family Rec Center, again, going to the priority list, the tennis building roof replacement and the tennis building painting were also moved to an out year. Any questions?
I have a question about, well, it's not the Family Rec Center, it's the hard court tennis court, so.
Would you like me to have Mr. Langfield come up and?
It's just been a question from the public is when will the pickleball striping appear? But I don't know if that's in this budget.
We have striped, I believe, 2 of the hard court tennis courts on White Way with pickleball lines already. So right now, there's a couple of courts out at White Way that have both
Okay,
tennis court lines and pickleball lines on them.
okay,
So in future years, when we look to redo that entire facility, there will be dedicated tennis courts and dedicated pickleball courts at the same location. But right
Okay.
now, there's some courts that have both on them.
all right, that was a question.
Good. Anything else, council?
No.
Okay.
Looking at the street improvement fund, 2 changes here. So the Ferncliff Avenue sidewalk phase 2. So one of the things that we had a pretty lengthy conversation about, both internally and here somewhat at the council, was the notion of making sure that we can manage all the projects. If you remember the total capital project list, particularly with the ARPA projects, it was very, very lengthy. And we if we're going to do something, we want to do it well and we want to get it done on time. So what the staff and I talked about was making sure that we didn't take on anything or give the impression to the council and the community that we're going to do every single thing on this list and get it done, and then we don't meet those expectations. So this is a project that, in light of everything else that we have, all those ARPA projects and everything else, we just feel that we don't have the capacity to manage all of this. And so we are suggesting to move the Ferncliff Avenue sidewalk phase 2 to fiscal year 25. That will free up some of our staff capacity to focus on everything else. We are also looking at the pedestrian master plan. In this original budget, there was $50,000 in there, sort of as a placeholder for pedestrian master plan improvements. But as we talked in June, we have a different funding source potentially identified for those improvements. That's the CRA improvements. So we took those $50,000 out of this street improvement fund.
So I have a question about the Ferncliff sidewalk, because it's been a while since that came before us, and I don't really recall exact the details. I mean, I knew there was a phase one, phase two. Did phase one satisfy the immediate concerns of the neighborhood about the children walking on the road and the cars? And I don't remember all the details, but I know that a lot of this had to do with kids walking to the school and walking.
Yes, so phase one did address that issue. And actually, phase two is a phase that we developed internally. It was never a request.
Okay.
So what it would do is tie the existing sidewalk where it is in the Ferncliff, tie that into the park, Biltmore Park. So it was something that we looked at and envisioned it would be a nice feature within those neighborhoods to then tie that facility into the park. But for right now, yes, the existing sidewalk has been completed. We are waiting on the final of the handrail. Once that has been fabricated, we will be installing the handrail, and that will address all the concerns that were initially brought forward.
Okay, that was what I wanted to know. Thanks. Any other questions on this?
That was my
slide?
question as well.
Okay, Gil, anything?
Yep, we're good. They're happy.
Thank you, Troy.
Under the Water and Sewer Utilities Fund, we had a $300,000 item for maintenance and repair of the water plant. And this was sort of for routine maintenance. The water plant, we all know, is aged. It's in pretty tough shape. It's not in horrible shape, but in pretty tough shape. So this number was put in there originally just to say, in case we have unforeseen repairs, things like that, let's have a number that could address those. What we've encountered since is we've met with a consultant. We've looked at sort of a master plan for repairs and renovation to the plant. And it seems to make more sense to kind of put this off, take these dollars out and just wait, because we don't want to start making improvements to the plant. So these routine patches here and there, and then find in a year or 2 years, we have to take it all out because we're going to do something else. And so we just felt it was a better use of dollars to push this out to 25. Once we get this plan in place, we'll have a better idea of exactly where to target our investment.
So I heard recent months, probably part of this process or in another conversation, I heard conversation that at some point in the not too near future, or not too far distant future, we're going to have to replace this water plant.
I
Which-
believe the intent, as Carlos indicated, would be to do this initial evaluation, to take those funds and assess the plant itself, assess the treatment process, make a determination, is there a better process that's out there? Is there something that's a little more modern than our current treatment process? Not that there's anything wrong with our current treatment process. I think our water meets all the highest of standards. I think it's very good to drink. We all live in the city, we drink the water. So there's not an issue there, but it's just an evaluation of, do we want to look at options that would be a little more modern, and then make a determination at that point if we want to look to go down that pathway, because that dollar amount could be quite high, well into the potentially tens of millions of dollars for replacement of the entire facility. And how we would likely tackle that would be either a phased approach, or we would look to take out, to get an FRS loan, or to maybe bond that out for that effort. But we need to go through step one first, which would be kind of that feasibility evaluation of the entire system. And we may make a determination that, you know what, the system doesn't really need to be upgraded. There's really no need. But it does need some tweaking here and there, maybe some installation of some newer elements within the plant itself to kind of bring that to a little more modern standard. So that's what we're looking to do.
Well, that's kind of goes to the heart of my question is, are we commissioning a survey of this plant to explore this? Because what I'm getting at here, I mean, this is a big project. As you mentioned, this is tens of millions of dollars. We've got a couple of other big projects. We've got a police station that's hopefully first in line. We've got the downtown enhancements to some parks and pedestrian facilities we're talking about. We've got some pedestrian and bicycle paths throughout the city, which hopefully we'll be able to get some funding sources for that. But a project of this magnitude would be good to have some visibility on this years ahead of time.
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm getting at. Are we in the process, or have we, or are we planning to commission a study to say, well, in 10 years we should replace this, or we should replace the whole thing, or we should, so that we have some idea before somebody, you or your successor comes before us and says, we need $30 million because the thing is defunct.
No, that would be the intent of this study, is to evaluate the current system. As Carl's mentioned, with ARPA and everything else we have going on, we're looking to build a new facility. This is not something that we'd be looking to implement in the next couple of years. It would likely be 5 or even 10 years out before we did a lot of that initial work. But I think we want to lay the groundwork now, get an evaluation of the system, see how it's functioning, see if there are potentially some tweaks that we could do. Again, we may make a determination that the system as it operates is ideal, and we just need to, again, upgrade a few of the elements within that operational system. So I don't know if I'm addressing your answer, but it's not something that we'll be doing in the immediate future. As far as
The study or the work?
the study, the work would not be done immediately.
But we are doing the study soon.
We have not commissioned it yet, but yes, we are looking to do that. We're trying to get that in before the end of this fiscal,
Okay,
get that started.
that's what I want to know. Council member?
That's what I was going to say too.
Okay, council member?
I just want to confirm that because this is a project that comes through an enterprise fund, that the funding, while the general fund can the general fund actually invest in this project? I know they can loan money to the enterprise fund, but does all the funding have to come through the enterprise fund itself?
I would recommend it come through the enterprise fund, because that's the intent of that fund, is to provide the services that are associated with that. And part of that service is the plan itself.
So no matter what, this fund does not have a fund balance to, at this time, or even maybe a few years from now, to pay out of pocket. So we will have to do some sort, we'll have to know about this project.
So, yeah, so we're gonna have to, that's part of that study. At least I would have an expectation that part of that study would have a financial analysis plan showing us exactly ways we could pay for this.
Okay.
And I agree with you, Councilmember Fernandez. I think there would probably be a scenario where the general fund may have some role to play in that, whether it's use of unassigned fund balance as some sort of a potential loan, like we talked about with sanitation on Tuesday. There may be different things, but right now it's so early, we don't know what all those will be.
Okay, and I think to echo the mayor, the sooner we have the long-term expectations in front of us, then the sooner the budget can be prepared that direction, or the decisions, to help with to smooth the funding out.
Yeah, because there's likely grant opportunities and other things out there that take years to actually get. You would apply, and a lot of times it takes 2 to 3 fiscal years before those funds are actually available.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Troy.
Thank you.
Okay. So looking at the next slide, in our renewal and replacement fund, so this is the fund where the water and sewer utility fees, some of them go here to pay for capital. And so we looked at this, and thanks to the great work of Jim and Jennifer, they had a great idea to actually move several of these projects to the water and sewer improvement funds, which are funded by impact fees. So that's when a development comes through, they pay a fee, and we have dollars sitting there. So it's better to use those dollars first for these types of improvements where we can. So we, you'll see the ones here. The iHydrant 5-year program was moved to that water improvement fund. The River Hills at 56th, the gravity main design and construction as well as the Woodstock, force main design and construction. And finally, the lift station D design was moved to an out year. This is following that same logic up. We're trying to be more rational in terms of the projects that we can actually manage over the next fiscal year. Any questions?
I do. I'm not sure. So some of this reflects money going into the fund as well as money coming out. It's just moving money to where it's going. But we've had several discussions about moving things from general to enterprise funds where it seems more appropriate. But what's the net result of all this? Because the enterprise funds are already, particularly sanitation, is already kind of struggling. So, go ahead, Jim.
Actually, it's the effect on it doesn't have any effect on the sanitation, but it does have an effect, a positive effect, on the water and sewer utility fund, That's what we call the 410 fund. That's where we pay the salaries, all the operating costs. The other three funds are capital funds. We have the 430, which is the renewal and replacement fund. And that's where these were originally budgeted. We also have the 440 water improvement fund and the 450 sewer improvement fund. The revenues for those two funds are mainly impact fees. And we're only supposed to use impact fees to address issues caused by new development, because that's where the money comes from. When developers come in, they have to pay a certain amount. So instead of funding we actually conferred with Brian and Troy, and they identified a few projects that can be rationally tied to the use of these impact fees. So we're moving them out of moving them out of the renewal and replacement fund and putting them directly into the water improvement fund and the two big ones in the sewer improvement fund, because those are related to the sewer collection. So it's using the money we already have that's sitting there that we need to use it. Otherwise, it's just sitting there. The positive point is that taking it out of the renewal and replacement fund, that fund has been primarily funded by the 410 water and sewer by a contribution of $1.5 million a year. So next year, we're not going to have to do that $1.5 million because we've got two projects out of 430 going in using the impact fees that we already have that we need to use.
Okay.
So I know that's a lot of
No,
moving around, but
actually, that helped. I don't know if maybe I was the only one a little behind the curve, but that helped me better understand what you're doing here. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Council, we get,
I
no,
do.
Council.
I just for the people that might be listening that don't understand governmental accounting, is that there are different funding sources, and the funding sources come with a requirement that you can only spend them certain ways. So for example, the general fund cannot just transfer money to an enterprise fund. They can loan money, or they can buy services from the enterprise fund, or they can not charge the enterprise fund as much for administration, but we can't just transfer money there. And the enterprise fund is funded by the fees that someone uses to purchase the utilities or the sanitation, depending on the expense. And those fees are to be used for the replacement and renewal and the operations of that utility service. So I just want to, like, if somebody's listening and they're like, we have a surplus in the general fund, why aren't we using it to pay for this? And the impact fees are specifically so that when development happens, it's to offset the expense that development has caused in us needing to increase our utility service capacity or, put sidewalks where none were before, something like that. So that's why we're able to use impact fees for some of these projects. So just in case people are listening that are concerned that it sounds like we're like playing magical shells. We're not. You have to use the funds a certain way. So we just are doing that within the requirements.
that's correct. And you cannot use the impact fees to pay for salaries, operations, that's out of that 410 fee, or fund, 410 fund.
Good. Thank you, Jim. That was helpful.
Okay. Now we get to the actual discussion about the utilities and the rates. So I have here the water and sewer utilities, the 5-year pro forma. So I want to draw your attention basically to two things. First, about 3 rows down from the top, you'll see the proposed increase. So it's a 5% increase, and we'll talk about the assumptions in the next slide as well. But if you look all the way across on that row, you'll see it's a 5% increase recommended every year over the next 5 years. And what that would allow us to do is, based on all the assumptions that we'll discuss, allow us to keep that ratio of fund balance to operational expenses, which is the bottom row, at the 25% target. So it'll keep us in line with that target all the way across. Now, if you allow me to just, these are the assumptions that we use. So, as I mentioned, 5% rate increase, a 3% growth rate in 24, 2% growth rate in 25, and then 1.5% growth rate in 26, and then flat from that point forward. In terms of interest, we expect a 2% decrease in 24 and 25, and then flat going forward. And then expenditures, one thing I really want to highlight is the fact that we know that we're going to get a 3% annual wastewater treatment fee increase from the city of Tampa. So that's going to happen to us. So we need to be trying to stay up with that as much as we can. 6% operational expense increase in 24, 5% in 25 to 28, 6% personnel increase in 25, 5% in 26 to 28, and then depreciation of 2% for 24 to 28. And then, as Jim just alluded to, we have the good fortune right now by using those impact fees, we don't have to contribute that $1.5 million, but that would start back up in fiscal 26. Any questions?
Gil, can you see these slides?
Yes, I can. No, this is very good information. If I could add that, I appreciate the efforts done by Jim and his staff in doing these projections and utilizing the enterprise funds, moving stuff around as necessary, doing the rationalization. So this helps us. I believe this helps us tremendously.
Thank you, Gil. Council members, other comments, questions? Councilmember Abel.
So I would imagine we would expect that there's going to be fewer developments in the future that would bring in fewer impact fees, because there's not really a lot available in the future to fulfill that.
Correct. Right. So on the impact fee side, you're right. You'd probably see a decline in impact fees, and you'd see the same sort of growth rate decline here reflected in the assumptions for new people connecting to the service.
Councilmember Fernandez.
I have a question, because our water utility service actually extends past our city boundaries. When, are there areas outside in those boundaries, in that utility service delivery space, is there space for development there? And when that happens, how do they allocate the impact fees?
First, there is space for development in those areas, because we're looking at some of those in terms of a master plan for annexation. But in terms of the impact fees, I need to ask. They're not in the city yet. Do they go to their county, and how does that work?
Troy's getting up, thank goodness.
We're all in trouble.
They may need to phone a friend here.
So those impact fees would come to the city, yes. So now, part of that impact fee is associated with the sewer side. That, actually a good portion of that, whether it's in the city or not in the city, always goes to the city of Tampa. That's just how that's established, because they're the ultimate receiving body. They have to treat that wastewater. But on the water side, no, we realize all that revenue within the city, whether it's in the service area or within the city. Well, of course, the entire city is within the service area. So any work within our service area, we realize all that revenue within the water side. It's the wastewater side that it doesn't, a large portion of that actually goes to Tampa.
Well, just out of curiosity, if we have a development and if the wastewater side of the impact fees goes to the city of Tampa, who actually who's responsible for paying for the pipe that actually transports the wastewater to the Tampa treatment plant?
So any improvements within the system falls upon the developer.
Okay. So they'll pay the fee
And
pay for the infrastructure.
that's correct. And then they would deed the infrastructure over to the city. We would then maintain it in perpetuity. That's what we did for the development on Old Morris Bridge Road. So they put in a new force main, at their expense, and then they turn that over to the city. Now we have to maintain it in perpetuity.
Okay. And of course, that's paid for by the usage
Yes,
of the new,
correct.
either resident or office or whatever.
Right.
Okay, so I was just curious about how that could go, because I know within our current city boundaries, you really would have to tear down and rebuild to have substantial development. So we should be pretty consistent with our existing boundaries.
Councilmember, you raise a good point about the unincorporated area. So it's not going to make a difference in the projection for the upcoming fiscal year, but it's something that I want to talk with Troy and Jim and his team as well, because I do know there's some development happening right now in those areas, and there's still land available because we've talked about it here. So I just want to make sure that we're accounting for that potential in our projections going forward for this particular fund.
Okay.
Councilman Rabel?
That goes along with my question. I was wondering, do we have a concrete annexation plan in place? Or is there some sort of map that shows what we expect to happen or want to happen?
So there have been discussions about this in the past before I even got here. It's something that the council and myself, I'd like to have a conversation about at some point to get some clear direction as to whether, because the council has changed since these conversations were had. So I want to make sure the council is comfortable with whatever you want to do. If you want us to pursue that, we'll definitely pursue it. Right now, we've had very preliminary discussions with representatives, for example, the county, just kind of having understanding what this might mean. But we could be more assertive about it if that's what the council wishes.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Okay, well, I had a question, but on this one, I know we used to have some annexation agreements, especially over in the 301 area, that when their properties become contiguous, they have to annex. Have we used all that? Are there any more properties that are still under those agreements?
So I believe specific to the industrial park over
Yes.
off of US 301, I think there are two or three parcels that we installed a new force main, and when they decide to come into the area, they will be connecting to that, and part of that annexation will be that to get to utility service, they'll have to annex into the city.
So we still have some properties that would, I
Right.
won't say forced to come in, but by agreement will come in.
Exactly, and our agreement allows us to do that. The utility service agreement, we have the option to either request that they annex, or to, if they're not contiguous, then we would not, of course, implement that aspect of the agreement.
Okay, and the question I wanted to ask first, we used to charge areas in our service area, not in the city, more for water and I would think sewer. Do we
Yes.
still do that?
Yes, we
Is it
do.
still 25%?
I think it's 10.
10? Whatever it was. That's fine, but we're still doing that.
So citizens realize the savings over those that are in unincorporated county.
I mean, that's something that used to be used to help areas that thought about annexing coming in because it's a savings of their water bill.
Yeah.
So just wondered if we were still doing it. Thank you.
So just, not for you, Troy, just for everybody's edification. So the city manager and I have had conversations about having I don't know what you'd call it, like a land use workshop with the council to talk about annexation and talk about the overlays and those kinds of things. We have not been able to do that. First of all, we wanted to make sure we got our community development director in place and the city planner, and so there was some turnover there. We wanted to make sure our staff was there. The city manager and I have both, and Mr. Pauly and Mr. Sherman, there's been a lot of discussions. There are some potential growth opportunities for us out on Old Morris Bridge Road. There's a bridge that we got on, a bridge study that we were able to get on the TPO list to study the possibility of putting a bridge over the bypass canal, which would open up some property north of the old Big Top Flea Market, which currently has no access to, but if we had a bridge, there could be, it's not Temple Terrace, but it potentially could be, and it's in our service area. So there are a few growth opportunities aside from infill. But there's only so much that we're going to pursue until the council has an opportunity to develop a plan. We don't want to get too far out in front of council here until the council decides what we want to do as a body so that then we can pursue. But there are limited opportunities. But these assumptions, I think, are good assumptions that were put in here. This rapid incline of property values is already starting to level off. It's not going to go like that forever. It's going to level off. It's going to level off probably at a higher rate than it used to be, but it's still going to level off. So the growth is going to cool. I think these are good assumptions, and hopefully we can get each year, we won't necessarily have to go up 5%. I'd like to see us be able to come in less than that on water every year, but it's good to have that there, so. Gil, do you have anything?
Now, all of my questions have been answered through the discussions, but I concur with you, Mr. Mayor, regarding the 5% growth or 5% rate increases, and as well as the stabilization of the property values. As long as we don't have a decrease, we should be okay.
Okay. All right.
The next pro forma is for our sanitation fund. So again, drawing your attention to the revenue line. You see here, in June, we had originally talked about a potential 10% increase. Jim and Jennifer have gone through and really drilled down, and they believe that they can get this rate increase at 8.5% in fiscal '24. And if you follow along on that same row, you'll see it would be, to make this all work, they'd be 8.5% in '24, 5% in '25, and as well as '26, and then 3% in '27, and then 2.5% in '28. And if you do that, if you go down to the bottom row, when you see the ratio, again, we're trying to get to 25%. So we'd be at 10, 16, 21, and in the last 2 years, we'd finally make it to 25, with sort of, at that point, much smaller increases. So that's the goal. I can tell you that the finance team and Mr. LeBlanc and his folks, they're working really hard to make all this work. There's a lot of, and you all know, we've talked about it here, there's a lot of cost inflation in the trash world. I mean, it's almost like healthcare. I mean, it's just, numbers just keep going up and up and up. So we're trying to keep pace as well as we can and also soften the burden on our users. Now, let's talk about the assumptions now. Some of these assumptions are going to look very familiar. So again, 8.5 rate increase. We talked about the 5%, 3%, 2.5 for the next several years. It's contemplating a 3% growth rate in '24, 2% growth rate in '25, 1.5% in '26, and then flat in '27 and '28. Interest, again, 2% decrease in '24, '25, and then flat going forward. For expenditures, we have an 8% increase in solid waste disposal fees from the county, both in '24 and '25 projected already. 10% operational decrease in '24 because, as if you recall on Tuesday, we talked about we're suspending some of the payments coming out of the sanitation fund, for example, to fleet. So to the fleet fund, so we pull those out to save on some of the cost. We have an 8% operating increase in '25, 5% 26, 27, 28, 6% personnel increase in '25, 5% in '26 to '28. We will resume the contributions to fleet in this model in fiscal year '25, and we're using a depreciation per the schedule from '24 to '28. In terms of the aggregate number of waste that these assumptions are built on, it's 7,500 tons of commercial disposal and 6,000 tons of residential disposal.
So I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this question. The water increases, the wastewater increases that we pay to the city of Tampa are going up for the next 20 years or so, but that's a fairly predictable increase. It's fairly stable at 3, 4, 5, whatever % a year. I don't think the tipping fees at the county have been very predictable. So how confident are we in these predictions of, what was it, 8% a year? Because haven't we gotten some out of the blue 15% increases, or that just came out of nowhere, unexpected?
Yes and no. The county, the last discussion I had was last week. So in 36 months, we got a 38% increase.
That's what I'm,
So here,
yeah.
the county's response, and through all my time here, has been this. We usually know by June what we're gonna ask for in July or August. So for them to say, what are they gonna do next year? They'll say, call us in June. Because the BOCC doesn't get together and start putting their stuff together till around June. But my experience would be this. You're gonna get another increase next year. They're trying to fund another incinerator. They have to fund another incinerator, which is billions. They were planning on funding a recycling center, a grandiose thing on Falkenberg Road for single stream recyclables to open in 2 months. That was 3 years ago. They figured out there's more trash than recyclables with the population sprawl. So I'd be the most surprised person if you didn't get at least 8 or 10% next year. It's not very predictable, and they have told me for 20 years, May, June, we'll give you a heads up of what they're going to propose. I think it's the August 16th meeting. That's going to go through anyway. So, no, it's really not predictable. You're right, it's not. Because one year we went backwards, like in 2005, we went backwards, $4 a ton. But 15, 15, and 8, and their contracts with like FCC and stuff, those haulers have clauses in them where they can come back with an increase too for their services. So it's just this upwards domino effect. It's hard to predict.
So what's our confidence
Yeah,
level?
so
Yeah.
can I ask if I can get Jim to come up, because he's got some information.
I mean, I know you don't have the crystal ball here either. I'm just making sure that we're,
The sanitation fund is one that, as in any fund, but especially this one, we're going to have to look at year to year.
yeah.
When we had our workshop in June, we didn't know at that time what the rate would be. I think we had it, because it had been 15% the last 2 years, I think we originally projected 10% to be on the safe side. That week or shortly thereafter, Ray got the numbers from the county, it will be 8%. So we're basing our budget projections for this year on that 8%. What happens after that, we don't know. For our projections, we're kind of sticking with that 8%. They may have to change next year. Maybe they come back and say 10 or 5. We don't know, but this is kind of our best guess, sticking with what we have been hit with this coming up year, that 8%.
So the only suggestion I might submit for you to consider is this, is we did this last year because we went up 10% on garbage last year too. Sanitation's a little different than water because there's nobody else. You can't buy your water from anybody else. You don't have a choice. You have to buy your water from us. But garbage, when it goes up, it's always, in my opinion, it's smart for us to do a bit of a snapshot analysis to show that we're not all out of whack in order to kind of head off groups of citizens that might come forward and say, okay, you guys can't provide garbage at an affordable rate. Why don't you privatize? Why don't you open this up to let other private companies, haulers come in to the city to do this because they could do it cheaper? We haven't heard that in a while, but we have heard that, particularly on the commercial side. They say, oh, I'm paying so much for garbage, and if I were in Tampa and I could use waste management, I'd be saving tons of money, which turned out not to be true, but it's always good to have that proactively to show everybody, listen, it's going up, but it's still in line or a better value. So with this industry being so tiered, it's almost impossible to get like a full, like, okay, there's so many different variables. You have an 8-yard dumpster picked up once a week, or you have a 4-yard dumpster picked up 3 times a week. I mean, there's a lot of, but to get a couple of different residential is this, and this is what it costs in the county, this is what it costs in Tampa, this is what it costs here. A 4-yard dumpster once a week costs this. To have at least some data points that we could put up when we have the meetings where we're approving this rate increase to show the public, yes, it's going up, but don't believe it if somebody tells you that, we're the highest paid, garbage in the state of Florida, which is, I mean, that's not true.
So, yeah.
Yes,
So we can do that, and I just want to, part of the issue is that the private haulers sometimes will confuse the matter,
I know.
because from a private hauler's perspective, they do not want curbside pickup. That's a money loser for
Yep.
them. So they'll never do that. So they'll give you a rate on the commercial side, which is very attractive potentially. It could be much more attractive than ours. I'm not really sure if it is or not, but it could be, because they're not incurring the cost that our system incurs to pick up all the thousands of residents at their homes and their curbside. So we'll definitely look at it. We'll compare other municipalities to see how much their rates are, and we'll provide that information to council. But I just want to make sure, because to the earlier, I think the first thing you said, if somebody calls a commercial hauler, well, if Joe's auto body shop calls that commercial hauler, yes, their rate could be very attractive because there's not the other part of that.
Right. Well, the other thing is, and I know it's difficult because I've done this dance before trying to get an analysis, and you can't look on their website and get a price. They'll tell you to submit it, and they'll call you, and they do what the insurance companies do with your car insurance too. They'll give you a sweet deal for the first 6 months, and then they give you this sweet deal, and then 6 months later they raise your rates 30%. So I get it. The only thing I'm suggesting is maybe to talk to have somebody who works at the city. You live in Hillsborough County, what are you paying for garbage at your house? And you live in Pasco County, what do you pay for garbage at your house? And, okay, find a couple of people that have businesses in Tampa or Hillsborough and say, what do you pay for 4-yard dumpsters? Or, yeah, to go to Waste Management or one of these companies, you're never going to get a good number. There's no way.
Just to let you know, we have already started looking at some other municipalities
Okay.
on different rates, doing a study. As you know, this would be projected to start October 1. So we'll be getting notices out with the bills in August that we're going to have hearings, or discussion on the rate increase that go along with the budget hearings in September. So we'll try to get some of that data put together.
I think it would be helpful. I mean, last year we went up 10%, which was a huge, and we're going up again. So, I mean, that's a huge increase in one time.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did was we were very proactive in putting up a lot of information, a lot of data. We didn't wait for public comment, people to come in and complain. We did it proactively. And even with a 10% increase, I don't know about everybody, but I didn't hear any complaint. I mean, a little grumbling here and there from your neighbors or whatever, but we didn't hear any real complaints. But I think a lot of that had to do with us getting out in front of it and explaining to the public why. So,
I have questions.
yes, Councilmember.
I don't know who might be able to answer it, but when the county actually incinerates, aren't they selling this to Tampa Electric? I mean, aren't they generating electricity from the incineration process?
Yes. Yeah, they're Covanta, which is a conglomerate that actually manages all these places. Yeah, they're selling. They burn the trash, they make the heat, which makes the steam, which turns the turbines, and they sell that.
Okay, so what kind of communication are we having with the county counterparts? Because that selling the electricity has to offset the cost of operating the incinerator, and to me, also reducing the land required for the storage of the landfill, and
One quarter.
So I guess what I'm saying, we see the tipping fees go up every year, and that seems to be a given that no matter what happens, the tipping fees are going up. However, what's the conversation with the county side of this saying, how are the tipping fees going up every single year if we're actually reducing or maybe holding steady with the land required for a landfill, and you're generating income from the electricity sales? That's got to offset, at least I would think the rates have to offset the cost of operating the incinerator and potentially some of the capital cost to build the incinerator. Like, what are we paying for in this increase every year?
I think it's one of the best business models I've seen in my life. That's a great point. To put it politely, in my opinion, it's an unwinnable argument. Covanta, Wheelabrator, Technologies, all them, they're conglomerates. And what you spoke of, how they have, and I've seen them, not here in previous, but 1,400, 1,500 page contracts. That will answer your question.
So what would be the cost to
May I-
build an incinerator?
I have a little bit of experience with this. So the electricity business is very regulated.
Yep.
And so they're probably in contracts that are pretty much fix them in place and what they can get. So and then any kind of rate increase, things like that have to go through the what's it called, the PS,
Right.
Regulatory Commission.
Regulatories, yeah.
And so it's an industry that their model, I'm sure when they built the facility, they probably had a model that's 20, 30 years out trying to figure out exactly where, and they entered into these contracts for that. So what I would imagine is, so they got to fix them out, and I'm not defending them. I'm just saying that this is probably what they would tell us, is that they've got a model. This is the fixed revenue income they might be getting depending on the demand on the grid and what the contract allows based on what the Regulatory Commission allows for rates. At the same time, they have the same challenges we do, probably personnel costs, insurance costs, everything else keeps going up and up and up. So what they do have is they kind of have a monopoly in a way, because they're the only incinerator around, so they can kind of squeeze and say, well, we're gonna pick up. We think about any kind of increase. We spend a lot of time thinking about that, right? We want to minimize that. They don't have probably that same pressure because they're, again, a monopoly, so they can just say, well, we got to keep up with our costs, and this is why we keep charging X amount to go up there. And I'm sure they've got, environmental regulatory issues because they develop ash. So they incinerate. There's a lot of ash. It goes to a landfill. There's a cost to that. There's a cost for regulating that. Eventually, they're going to run out of space. They probably need to buy another piece of property or whatever it is. So they have their own issues, but they're not as constrained, I think, as we are in terms of what they can charge for the people that are using that service.
They're regulators, they're people that he spoke of, they're permittees that allow you to take so much in while they have to build another place because their only capacity. They all work for each other, to put it politely. They're their own police.
Councilmember Abel?
So Ray, would you say the only way to win this unwinnable argument is to produce way less trash? Like, we all get together and stop this,
Consumption is costly.
Yes.
I haven't run out of trash in 45 years doing this, so I wish you luck with that. It's just going to get bigger because they need more facilities. They're only permitted to input so much per day. It's an unwinnable argument, to be polite about it.
Well, it gets even more unwinnable if I could, because even Councilmember Abel, if we did that, reduced our trash output dramatically. They're going to still have the same set costs, so they're just going to increase the price per ton or whatever to make up for the difference. So we'll never win.
The house always wins,
Yeah.
right?
There used to be, and quickly, there used to be where it's called put or pay. If you didn't generate that, if you generated enough, you got a better rate. If you came below that, you got the higher rate. So that's.
But we do, as a municipality, receive a lower tipping fee
$10.
rate
$10.
than a private company,
It's always
so,
been $10 since 2000, no, 2000, $10 less. If they pay 50, we pay 40. We get the municipal rate, $10 less per ton.
I just, again, to close the chapter here, I just want to make sure that we do everything we can to communicate with the public. And this is an example, if we communicate this correctly, where privatization is not better. We are providing this service at a much better, a better service at a reduced rate. And you don't have to look far. You know, we grumble because we got a 10% rate increase. Well, nobody wants an increase. I grumbled too. I got to pay this also. But go to Polk County, and they're having trouble even getting your trash picked up. And so can you imagine putting your trash by the curb and it not getting picked up? And then the next day that it's supposed to get picked up, you put it out again, and it still doesn't get picked up. You go to Home Depot and buy more trash cans, and then you drag them all out to the street the following week, and they still don't get picked up. And before you know it, you've got 6 trash cans full of garbage stinking in your backyard. That's what's going on right next door. So I think we just need to put this increase in the proper context for the public to say, look, this is what you would pay if you lived in Brandon, and this is what you would pay if you lived in Seminole Heights or Pasco County. And this is what's happening in Polk County, which is not even close to happening here. I mean, people complain if you're 2 hours late. And so put this all in perspective. And the public last year, we didn't have any problem, but I think
You
messaging that is
lose
important.
control, but you maintain a responsibility.
Yeah.
That's not a good equation.
Okay. So back to the beginning of all this. Gil, did you have anything on this, or did you
Yeah.
go to sleep?
Yes, I do. A couple of points. Number one, when the first big increase came through a couple of years ago, I happened to have a discussion with one of the VOCC members, and they kind of reminded me that the quote-unquote tipping fee is their revenue classification to our service area, and everything, the electricity generation, it's kind of net of what the shortfall is. This is how their revenues are generated. So as far as that's concerned, they're already accounting for that and passing off the benefits to the customers. To your point, Mr. Mayor, regarding the edification of the citizenry, that's critical, and that helped so much last year. This is what we got. This is where we are. This is what we need to do. So do that again this year, and I think we'll be okay. But finally, I think we're a little too low on our projections for the future. It's not going to impact this year, but in future years regarding the fund balance, I would like to see a project, not to influence our decision for the budget for this year, but what would happen with a 10% increase to the disposal fees from the county. I think that it'll help us for the future, making better predictions. I think we just need to be a little more conservative. Otherwise, I'm comfortable with your assumptions.
Thank you, Gil. Okay, council members, have we beaten this horse to death enough? Okay.
Okay. And that is it. Any questions?
I do not. Gil, any questions about any of this?
I'm good.
Okay. So I just have a comment for Carlos, you and Jim and Jennifer and the team is you're doing a fantastic job and doing the hard work of getting some of this money where it needs to be in the proper places and getting these funds. This is crucial. And I know it's not easy. I know it would be much easier to put together a budget, put a few slides up, engage us in a bunch of conversation about the big ticket things or the capital items and be done. But I appreciate the work, and I know the whole council does, the work that you're doing of really getting in here and putting things where they ought to be in order to make the whole machine work better. And it really leverages every dollar that we have from whatever source we have to make sure that it's doing the most work that it can do. And so, good job. Good job, Jim, Jennifer, the rest of your staff. And so, thank you for what you're doing.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That it?
That is it for our team.
Okay, so I believe what we're going to do is close this meeting, and then we're going to open another meeting, which doesn't require you. I know you're disappointed at that. So, anything else for the council? Okay, then this meeting will be adjourned.